This is day 3 of the July 92 7-day retreat at Springwater. Before I start reading the questions, something is just coming up in my mind with several of the people who are here for the first time. In one way or another, the keeping down of eyes and not looking at each other has been somewhat of a problem. I don't recall anymore what I said. I'm sure I did say something in the beginning about it. But then one may not have heard it all, or I may not have said it all, so let's go into it for a moment, not make too much of it, because people are also finding things out for themselves about this. First of all, it's not a rule that the eyes be kept down. Remember in the center where I was training, if anybody kept their eyes up or looked around, they were getting a note. Because during walking, somebody was watching. People had their eyes down or not. Because that person had their eyes up. It's always an excuse for somebody to do something which everybody else is not allowed to do. And that makes us feel good when we are that one who can be in position to correct others. It's a shaky good, but we derive our energies from shaky goods. The reason I keep my eyes closed is not to set an example for eye closing. I find I can talk and look more clearly undisturbed when my eyes are closed. Don't get all kinds of impressions. Most people here, while listening to a talk, keep their eyes down, but it's all right if you want to look. It's quite all right. Some people say they get annoyed when they see me moving around all over the place, and other people say it's very intense and interesting, and it's helpful to see body language. So that's up to you. The suggestion to experiment with keeping one's eyes down is that there is something in sitting or walking together quietly, attentively, in having a, so to speak, private space in which to exist among some 40 or 50 people. Not easy to exist in such close proximity with so many people, but in keeping the eyes down, there is a space of aloneness in the midst of togetherness. Which is one thing one can find. One is alone with 50 pairs of feet. One doesn't look up. Also, our training has been, since we were little, to watch the eyes of others. You can see that with children. If a parent speaks harshly or says something, the children look at the eyes. Not just when a parent speaks harshly. Children learn to garner information from eyes of others. Whether the eyes look kindly or gently or sternly, disapprovingly. And many of us have learned, not all of us, but many of us have learned to try to please and look to be liked by others. That's been sort of our mode of survival, being liked by the parent or the parents, the elders, the teachers. And this happens largely through eye contact, other body language too, but eye contact is very decisive in that. Am I liked? Does he smile upon me or she? And of course, I need to smile at him for him to like me, or for her to look approvingly back at me. Got to constantly make sure through smiles that all is all right. And in the recent culture here, particularly in America, to wear buttons, you find it in Europe too now, you have these smiley buttons. Maybe you can't smile yourself, but you can wear a button. I'm not saying that there isn't something nice if we can freely smile at each other, because it's a beautiful day, or we feel light and good, lovingly, affectionate toward each other, and express that in a smile. It comes on its own, nobody has to tell us to. But very often we don't feel like that, and yet we were told and reprimanded already as children, smile. I've seen it so often, heard it so often. It's one of the most cruelest demands of a parent, a child who is in a bad mood, or cries, or is angry, to be told to smile. And maybe the parent putting on sort of a waxy smile to give the example. And children see through that, feel imposed upon. Later on it becomes a habit. Either to insist on one's bad mood expression in defiance of the command to smile, or to go along with it so that one be in the good graces of the others, not nagged or bothered. So in not having eye contact, having this freedom here not to have eye contact, one can explore all of this which has taken place in one's life, feel one's dependence on it, and also realize how much we interpret someone who, as one person put it very aptly, has an expressionless face. How are we in the presence of someone with an expressionless face? It is the ultimate possibility for projecting what goes on in that person. And the interesting thing is that most of us project sadness, or indifference, or zombiness, or absence of friendliness onto a face without expression. It's very interesting. I've only learned this here. And yet, having this very fortunate position of being in touch with everyone here, by no means is everybody who doesn't smile an unhappy person. We now have group meetings. We had one in Sweden where the same thing came up. And one person who had been pointed out to me as one who seemed so sad, he never smiled. He says, I've had the most fantastic week I've ever had. First time I've been really deeply happy. It never happened before in my life. He said it in a group of 7. We had a little bit larger groups. They were very popular there. So, to beware, not just to beware, to be aware of what this mind does with what it sees. It needs to interpret, to make storyline continuously. And then we react more to what gave rise, more to the story than to what gave rise to it. To observe that and to become wise about this is a tremendous thing. To see something is perceived, has a certain effect, and then thoughts go to work about it. And pretty soon we're all reactive to what thoughts tell us has happened. And whether or not this really has happened it doesn't matter, becomes unimportant. What is important is the story. But we don't see it until we wake up to it. And that's the marvelous thing that's possible for human beings like you and me, to wake up to all the machinations of the mind and be amazed at their profound effect upon us, and the blurriness between story and reality. I fully understand if somebody says, I came here, I want to have relaxed time and also converse with people. This is what I would really like. Be out on the porch and chat with people who I'm interested in. Why are they here? What is their life? And there are such occasions we do have. Actually, when we do have such occasions, like we had an annual meeting last week, hardly anybody came. We have 220 members or so, and many non-members who come. But there were, besides staff and trustees, were 10 people there. We had a very good discussion here. And afterwards we had a picnic. Hardly anybody was there. People, it was a 4th of July weekend, maybe people were busy with their family and meeting with their friends. But we don't offer this kind of retreat where retreat is to go inward and to find out about oneself in a new situation, not in our habitual situations and ways of interacting, because they are habitual, they don't lend themselves to waking up to, as well as being in a new situation in which we don't talk and maybe choose not to look at each other. And being really more starkly alone with oneself and all the stuff that comes up. That happens too. Someone may arrive here for the first time and rejoice in the beauty of the place. The hills and the trees, the wonderful landscaping and the grasses, the lovely building with all the windows. The first evening, of course, we chat and have soup together, and people bring and find a real inspired enthusiasm for being here and hope to find peace and quiet during the rest of the week. And then this initial enthusiasm wanes and up comes the stuff. And this is partly what this place was built for. To be in touch with everything, not just the beauty of nature and the vastness of the sky that's spanning everything. The lovely moon and the sun and clouds, the animals and movement of grasses and wind and one's own hair blowing in the same aliveness. But also to touch oneself where one has never touched oneself. The totality of one's personality. Maybe in the beginning it's just this part and that part. It seems infinite. This personality seems infinite. One always comes upon something new, but also upon things which one realizes have plagued me all my life. Person said, I have this compulsion to be nice to everybody, to be liked by everybody. Let's look at it. What can I do? It's not nice to have to be nice all the time. It's a burden. It's shackles, is how one person labeled it. Oh, well, we'll read some of these things. So, to experiment with it. One finds oneself here, and if one isn't interested in leaving the place, well, the coordinators are always ready to drive somebody to airport or bus. I'm saying this not to get rid of anybody, but to make you not feel that you're trapped here. You're not trapped. I was training in a retreat center, in a Zen center, where it was the biggest of deals if you ever left a sesshin. We weren't going to be taken to another one. You knew that. You actually had to sign ahead of time that you will not leave this sesshin. And you were told that by leaving you would bring down the whole enterprise. The whole sesshin would suffer if you did that. So you were really already packed with guilt about something you hadn't even done yet. Because it occurs in the mind of everyone. Why am I here? It sometimes occurs to me. So, please don't feel trapped. But if you decide, no, I'm going to stay, and the person said, I'm going to stick it out through thick and thin, then let's listen alone and together quietly to what is going on inside this universe, because there's a whole universe inside. And this outside universe of which we are an integral part, not separate. No matter how deep our conviction and feelings that we're separate, we're not. But explore the separateness, which plagues our lives as human beings and brings us to the brink of mutual destruction. Our feelings of separateness and needs for uncanny alliances against enemies. We've talked about that. It may come up every once in a while. I feel very strongly about this. Maybe I haven't said everything about the eyes. I never say everything about everything. Obviously not. I can only say a little bit. Sort of touch, paint with some touches, light strokes. Sometimes they're intense strokes. But we ourselves, who are not different from each other, can fill in the whole picture by looking inwardly, outwardly, for moments at a time. It's not always possible, this looking, but it comes and then it goes. What place do precepts or commandments have in our life? Should I go through each question or read them all first? I'll read them all first. No, not so many this time. I have come upon a great lovingness. Person saying, stretch the arms out like that. Come upon great lovingness. What does it have to do with the rest of my life? I feel so dependent on someone to think that I am important. It gives such energy. I seem to live on it. Need it, can't do without it. And yet, for a moment, watching the moon through an opening in the dark sky, listening quietly, nothing more seemed needed for that moment. Then the yearning comes again to be somebody important to others. Is there ever an end to this? I want to be somebody, something all the time. This I am discovering more and more, the almost constant movement of thought, instant by instant, to make something out of everything for myself. I find that even though I'm angry here and there, most of the time I want people to like me. And I do what I can to please them. What can I do about that? I notice that even though I have many good friends, I keep a mental tab for each one's faults. this one does, what this one has is. I have a good position as a professional, but the work does not really grab me. It's mechanical and not challenging, not creative. I read in a recent newsletter article on right livelihood that it could be possible to bring some depth to anything one does. Can you say some more about that? My children are growing up, and I feel that I have to find something to do to contribute, something meaningful, something that I love to do. Nothing I can think of doing really makes any sense to me. So where are we going to start? There were also, I didn't have time to write them down, questions about not having a companion to live with, the loneliness and pain, the pain of that, and of course the mind, fantasy, constantly projecting someone to live with, who one could share with in an ideal way, in a loving way, helpful way. And then people reporting living with partners and fantasizing better ones who are different from the ones that one lives with. People who don't have children fantasizing about the beauty and fulfillment of having children. And people who have children wishing there was more free time to be for themselves. To do something by myself, to have some time for myself. Wanting a different profession. Maybe starting, going to school, doing a different profession, and after a while it becomes mechanical. It loses its spark that it had in the beginning. What is it that drives us around and around and around? Or onward, if you will. Constantly moving in search of something better, something more gratifying, more fulfilling, more creative, more together or more alone. Needing to be more important or needing to be less important, suffering from the importance one gives to oneself by finding other people's faults is also a burden. One can suffer from one's own importance because it drives the mind. It has to be maintained and repaired all the time. Cracks up, somebody else more important, or I made a mistake, somebody didn't acknowledge me. Remember this from my father. I loved my father dearly. Felt very close to, much closer than to my mother. He was very famous. As a child, of course, I thought he was the most famous person in the world, which wasn't quite true. But he had a certain world acclaim for his patents and inventions and writings. I was very identified with that, tremendously identified with my father and I told all my friends what my father was in school. Because I had this defect, being half Jewish, I had to make up for it through my Gentile father, but not because he was Gentile, but because he was famous. He was a professor doctor, and this is how he headed his stationary. That's how you do it in Germany, professor, doctor, and then name a few honorary doctors behind. So it was professor, doctor, 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 and and my mother was called Frau Professor. She got part of that. It's very important to a German. Some people who go on a sabbatical to Germany like that. They all of a sudden appreciate it more because they're addressed in hotels and wherever. They're addressed and you put your title down. This is part of your duty to yourself. So, whenever he had a birthday, flowers came and telegrams pretty much from all over the world. And he paid attention not only to those who came, but to those that didn't come. He would wonder, why hadn't so-and-so written yet? I wondered a little bit about that. Couldn't quite understand that. Because there was so much that came. But he would sort of hanker a little bit after those that hadn't written it. Because when the air raids came and we were all huddled in the air raid shelter, where I lived in Leipzig, there weren't many air raids, but a few of them were really very scary. I saw my father just huddled up, little old man huddled up, his coat and hat on. He didn't look left or right. He was scared. That's a tremendous impact on me. When he was old and he was sick, my sister moved him to the city where she lived, and he felt away from his university and the people there, and something happened to him that hadn't been the way I had experienced my father. He was kind of interested in what I was doing. I was already doing Zen training, and he wanted to hear about it, and I told him that we were sitting and showed him how we were sitting. He said, well, I'm much too old to do that, but he says, you do that for me, will you? He didn't do it for himself. He didn't. I wasn't there when he died, but so I can only go by what I heard, but something in a life with lots of medals and acknowledgement and stuff, something was missing. And the missing thing became larger and larger as the other dwindled away. He retired, and it was a successor, and then he was no longer the head of the institute. Somebody else, younger, more students from Japan, now from China, and so, And of course, a whole new thing. My father was in the field of photography. Now with the xerography and all of these new things, it just left photography behind. And he shriveled. He seemed to shrivel. Because something had not been nurtured in all the activity and success. And he was a wonderful teacher, marvelous, marvelous teacher. He could hold an audience. If somebody didn't listen, he stopped and looked at that person, or a person talking until that person paid attention again. So what we asked, what drives us for more position, more fame? And he loved what he was doing. He was inventive, creative, busy. This light would be on sometimes till 2 o'clock in the morning at his desk. His correspondence, he always answered anybody who wrote. He wrote a book and articles. Always busy, always acknowledged and successful, happy in his work, lots of students. What's missing in our life? We certainly feel the drive to be important, to have other people think of us as important. And we feel the energy of that. It sort of gives the motor the fuel to keep going. The position, the name of the position, makes our children happy, makes our parents happy. To say he's professor, my son or my husband or my father is a professor. In this country it isn't so much, or is it? Maybe it is too. Not like in Germany. So everything anybody could expect was there. So what drives us? Is this illusion to think that that way we will be fulfilled? If we really become somebody important, world-known, famous, lots of people knowing about us, coming to us, writing us, that will be fulfilling? It is fulfilling for a moment, for a while. But then another teacher comes up someplace else. One gets old. Somebody is better, more famous. And the mind keeps going. And jealousy and comparison, all of this kind of stuff that we human beings invent with this brain which is extraordinarily large for our size. Big enough for a lot of mischief to happen in there. To imagine the better job, the better husband, the better wife, or the ideal one. And then strive for it, go for it, look for it. And maybe if we find it after a while, of course it becomes jaded, because the mind does not see clearly. It sees in images, either the images that were there before, and one finds are not fulfilled by this person. After all, he is not what I thought he was, or she. Or else just this organism, maybe as a protective measure, has the ability to get used to things. It does get used to everything by knowing it, by filing it as knowledge, imagery. Then we don't have to go through the bother of looking, we can just know it. The image pops up instantly. Somebody may think, living here on staff in the country, this is the Shangri-La. Well, ask staff people how they feel about this place. And I'm not saying people don't enjoy it here or have a real appreciation for it, but one gets used to it and rather drives into Rochester on a weekend. Because the city is something now that makes it, for the contrast, people and offerings, movies or whatever. And the woods become ho-hum. Not for everybody, not all the time, but this thing one can see operating in oneself. That one morning one looks out and doesn't see anything anymore except the dreariness inside. The unfulfilled wanting, the discontent with what is. please, I'm not saying don't find a good occupation. Learn or study something that you love to do, whether it's academic or body work or mechanical, drawing or carpentry, whatever. But not to imagine that this will be all fulfilling for the rest of one's life or the partner one finds. Something else has to happen at the same time. And what is that? Do we need to explore where our deepest discontent originates? Our deepest fears, our deepest angers, our deepest wanting. What's the source of it? Way down, way past our childhood. Childhood has an impact on our personality, obviously. How we were brought up and denied or punished or rewarded. All of that has to do with how our personality developed, including our inherited talents, capacities, all drawn from a pool of DNA or genes manifesting now in this baby or in this adult. So there's inheritance and there's our childhood experiences which have a strong impact upon how our personality develops. A personality is there for all of us. We all have a personality, depending on millions of factors. This is so for all of us. And with this personality we're identified. We think, this is me, this is I, my personality. And everybody else thinks so too. We reinforce each other constantly, unquestioningly, in identifying with our personality as being me. This is what I am. And then we try to improve our personality or straighten it out, get the kinks out of it. The repressions or the denied areas, come in touch with things. We do this here too. So that maybe there's less resistance or blockage in the personality. But is that all we are? I'm questioning that. Because in this personality, there is constant wanting, constant fearing, anger, jealousy, or wanting to please, having learned to be nice, friendliness, affectionateness, comparison, envy, ambition, competitiveness, smarting from it or gaining from it. Why are we identified with all of that as me and so defensive of it, so protective of it, so enamored with it or hateful of it? But that's also an attachment. One hates one's personality, but one is attached to it. One resists any kind of change into a less hateful person. What is the origin of it all? Beyond genes, beyond DNA, beyond our childhood influences. The origin of the depth of our discontent, the depth of our feeling of separation. Because out of this feeling of separation comes discontent and yearning and fearing. A Have we ever wondered about this sense of separation? Of course, most people have. They wouldn't be here if they hadn't. But then we forget about this wondering and stick with all of our personality traits. Identify with them, defend them, act out of them, which is a very narrow realm in which to live. We seem to know no better, no different than to live in this narrow realm of personality and personality development, which has its place to heal some wounds and remove blockages. I'm not talking against that. But what is missing for most of us, what was missing for my father, was touching in depth something that had nothing to do with his capacities, his friends, his personality, his fame, his position, his family. He said, "You do that for me." But I couldn't. I can't. You can't do it for someone else. To touch that which is not conditioned, not conditionable, and therefore free. Free and open, and not separate. In touch with everything which is mostly empty space, with varying forms of sounds, birds and trees and people. Doing one's job. I talked in the last retreat, pulling weeds. At first doing it so rushedly and just trying to get it over, and then saying, wait a minute, what am I doing? And watching the hand pull at a weed and watch the root come out with a clump of crumbly earth. The fingers sort of moving the crumbling earth, falling back down on the bed, and there were all these little rootlets to take a look at it. Not just to get weeding done, so I can sit on the porch. Because then if I sit on the porch, I want to do something else. Because the organism is revved up to accomplish, to get things done, to get things over with, to do the next thing. So, can one work wherever one may find oneself? Or be wherever one may find oneself, the family situation? And find oneself in some space which is not occupied by anything, which is the blowing wind and the bird call and soil crumbling. Stirring a pot of soup as one watched the pieces swirling around, the feel of the ladle, steam rising into the face, the fragrance of it. Does one smell it? Is there time and space to do that? I don't necessarily mean to slow down to like slow motion movie. It doesn't have to slow down in that way. The revved upness, the wanting to get things done, can that slow down? So that in doing what one is doing or being where one is, there is space to be open and look and listen freely for the first time. It's such a moment of free looking or listening at what one is just doing. Cloth in hand, or pencil in hand, computer, keys on the fingers and the screen lit up in front of one. Is there some space to look and listen to what else is going on inside and out, spacious outside, spacious inside, then this computer is also spacious. Which it is. Scientists tell us that. All matter is mostly empty space. Even an electron is mostly empty space. An atom, mostly empty space. With some temporarily enduring cohesions or accumulations of things, and then it changes again. And I'm not saying go after this spaciousness, use your time meditating to find that, find enlightenment. I don't talk like that, do I? I hope not. Although people do tell me you talk about it and then I feel I don't have it and I begin comparing again and feel bad that others may have and I don't. Why don't you rather talk about my problems? Well, I do that too. Well, we'll do it together. Have it all in there together, can we? The problem, the anger, or the wanting to please, and the wind is blowing at the same time. The habit is seen as what it is, very strong, a lot of momentum. But one sees it's a habit because there's space to listen to the trees as well. And maybe wonder whether one has to go on pleasing everybody. Not I shouldn't, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying don't please people. Just wondering about the whole thing. Why are we doing that? What is our fear? That we may be fired or killed or thrown out? Sometimes, I've done this for myself many times, I ask to the very direst conclusion. And what if that happened? What if that happened? What if that happened? And finally you'd say, well, I would have to die. But we do have to die, so we die. When the moment comes. For millions of people it's there now from starvation, sickness, war, shelling. People dying everywhere. They don't want it, but they do. It's just sort of to loosen up these habits which run as though without them we would perish. This is the momentum, the energy behind our habits. And maybe when we were very little, we felt our life was threatened and we had to be nice in order not to be spanked or sent to our room. Ostracized. But today, we're not little anymore. We're not helpless. We can survive. We may not think so, but we can experiment with it. And at the same time, question inwardly and listen widely, spaciously, for maybe a completely different strength to arise, which does not depend on the job, on other people, on whether they like me or feel I'm important, which are all nice little boosters, admittedly. But is there another energy which does not depend on any of these outside factors? People, jobs, things, money, security, social security. We have to find out. And no one can do this finding out for us. We have to plumb ourselves. I hear somebody saying, don't always talk about plumbing it. Just sit quietly, and it's there. And it's true, it happens to people to come into this space of quietness or spaciousness or lovingness without having done a thing. No will involved, no no wanting. That's why it came. That's why it's there. When this personality quiets down a bit, and the energy collects in listening and looking and not running through all the personality branches and leaves. That's why in the very first evening we said, what am I? What are you? When I don't know. When I just begin to listen because I don't really know. We will end here for today.